Archangel Michael says, stop. Before you go any further today, there is a warning you need to hear. Read this slowly. It will not be repeated in exactly this way again. You are standing closer to a decision than you realize. Something has been building toward a choice point, quietly, over the past few weeks, and today, that choice point is closer than you think. Archangel Michael says, do not make that decision from exhaustion. Exhaustion has a way of making the wrong option look like relief simply because it promises an end to the struggle, not because it is actually right for you. Whatever you decide in the coming days, wait until you are rested enough to trust your own judgment again. You have felt pulled in two directions lately, one path familiar and safe, the other uncertain but somehow more alive with possibility. That tension has been exhausting to carry, and part of you simply wants it resolved, regardless of which direction the resolution comes from. Be careful of that impulse. Resolution chosen out of exhaustion rarely holds up once the exhaustion passes. Archangel Michael says, the warning today is this. Something or someone in your life has been asking for more than they have any right to ask for, quietly, in ways that may have felt reasonable at first but have gradually expanded past what is fair or sustainable. Notice where this has been happening. It deserves your attention before it costs you more than it already has. Think about where you have been saying yes lately, not because you genuinely wanted to, but because saying no felt harder than simply going along with what was being asked of you. That pattern, repeated enough times, quietly erodes something important. Consider where it has been happening most in your life recently, and consider what it would take to interrupt it starting today. Archangel Michael says, you are allowed to disappoint people in service of protecting your own capacity to function well. That is not selfishness. That is simply the ordinary maintenance a person requires in order to keep showing up for the things and people that genuinely matter most. Here is a second warning, distinct from the first. Watch for the specific voice in your own mind that convinces you to settle for less than what you actually want, framing that settling as maturity, as realism, as simply being reasonable about what's actually possible. That voice is not always wrong. But it deserves scrutiny before you accept its conclusions automatically. Think about a specific hope you have quietly downgraded recently, telling yourself it was unrealistic, that you were asking for too much, that you should simply be grateful for what's already available rather than continuing to want something more. Consider whether that downgrade was genuinely wise, or whether it was simply fear, dressed up convincingly as maturity. Archangel Michael says, you are allowed to want more than what has felt available to you so far. Wanting more is not ingratitude for what you already have. It is simply honesty about a direction your life is still capable of moving in, if you remain willing to pursue it rather than settling prematurely. Here is a third warning. Be careful of decisions made primarily to avoid other people's disappointment, rather than decisions made from genuine conviction about what is right for you. Disappointing someone is uncomfortable, but it is rarely as costly as making a significant life decision primarily to manage someone else's reaction rather than your own genuine well-being. Consider a decision currently in front of you where someone else's potential disappointment has been weighing more heavily in your thinking than your own actual preference. Notice that imbalance. Consider what it would mean to weigh your own preference more seriously, without dismissing the other person's feelings entirely, but without letting those feelings become the deciding factor either. Archangel Michael says, here is a fourth warning, perhaps the most important one today. Watch for urgency being used to pressure you into a decision before you have had adequate time to actually think it through. Genuine opportunities can typically withstand reasonable scrutiny and reasonable time to consider them carefully. Opportunities that only work if you decide immediately, without proper reflection, deserve extra caution rather than less. Think about whether any current decision in front of you has been presented with artificial urgency, pressure to decide quickly before you have had time to fully evaluate it. Consider slowing down deliberately, even if that slowing down risks losing the opportunity entirely. A genuine opportunity rarely disappears simply because you took reasonable time to consider it properly. Archangel Michael says, "Here is a fifth warning. Notice where you have been ignoring your own body's signals of stress, treating persistent tension, fatigue, or unease as simply background noise to push through rather than genuine information worth taking seriously." Your body often knows things before your conscious mind has fully processed them. Consider what your body might be trying to tell you that your mind has been too busy or too determined to actually listen to. Consider a specific physical sensation you have been experiencing lately, one you have been dismissing or pushing through rather than examining honestly. Ask yourself what situation in your life might be connected to that sensation, and consider what it might be trying to communicate about something that needs your attention. Archangel Michael says, protection today includes protecting your ability to actually hear these internal signals clearly, rather than drowning them out with constant activity, constant distraction, constant forward motion that leaves no space for genuine reflection. Consider building in some quiet time today, even briefly, specifically to notice what your body and your intuition have been trying to tell you. Here is a sixth warning, one that concerns how you have been treating yourself in private, when no one else is watching. Notice the specific language you use internally when you make a mistake, when things don't go as planned, when you fall short of your own expectations. If that internal language has become harsh, critical, or contemptuous, understand that this pattern, left unchecked, causes more damage over time than almost any external difficulty you might face. Consider what you would say to a close friend who made the exact mistake you are currently criticizing yourself for. Notice the gap between that compassionate response and whatever harsher response you have been offering yourself instead. Consider closing that gap, starting today, deliberately choosing gentler language even when it feels unfamiliar or undeserved. Archangel Michael says, you deserve the same compassion you would offer someone else facing an identical struggle. Withholding that compassion from yourself does not make you more disciplined or more accountable. It simply makes healing and growth considerably harder than they need to be. If this message reached you today, believe that these warnings arrived at exactly the moment you needed to hear them. Comment below if any of these specific warnings named something currently happening in your own life. Share this with someone who may need to hear these same warnings before making a decision they cannot easily take back. Thank you for staying with this message until this point. There is more still to say, because warnings this important rarely fit into a message this short. Archangel Michael says, here is a seventh warning, one that concerns the company you have been keeping lately, both in person and in the content you consume regularly. Notice how you feel after spending time with certain people, or after consuming certain kinds of media, content, or conversation. If a consistent pattern leaves you feeling more anxious, more cynical, or more diminished afterward, that pattern deserves serious reconsideration, regardless of how normal or unavoidable it has come to feel. Consider what specific relationship or habit has been quietly draining you lately, more than you have fully acknowledged. Not necessarily something dramatic or obviously toxic, simply something that consistently leaves you feeling worse rather than better. Consider what a deliberate reduction in that specific exposure might do for your overall well-being over the coming weeks. Archangel Michael says, you have more control over your environment than you may currently believe. Small, deliberate changes to who and what you allow regular access to your attention can produce significant shifts in overall mood and outlook over time, more than most people initially expect from changes that seem, on the surface, relatively minor. Here is an 8th warning. Watch for the specific belief that you must have everything figured out before you are allowed to begin something new. This belief, common as it is, quietly prevents countless people from ever starting things that would have genuinely benefited them, simply because complete clarity never actually arrives before action, only through it. Consider what you have been postponing, waiting for a level of certainty or preparation that realistically was never going to arrive in advance. Consider what a smaller, more modest first step might look like, one that does not require complete certainty, simply a willingness to begin imperfectly and adjust as you go. Archangel Michael says, perfectionism disguised as careful preparation has cost people more lost opportunity than almost any other single pattern. Consider whether this disguise has been operating in your own life recently, delaying something that genuinely matters to you under the reasonable-sounding cover of simply wanting to be fully prepared first. Here is a 9th warning, concerning how you have been measuring your own worth lately. Notice whether you have been basing your sense of value primarily on external achievement, external validation, or external comparison to other people's progress. This measurement, while common, tends to produce a worth that feels perpetually unstable, dependent on circumstances outside your control rather than something more solid and internally grounded. Consider what it would mean to root your sense of worth in something more stable, your effort, your integrity, your consistent care for the people around you, rather than in outcomes that are only partially within your control. This shift, while difficult, tends to produce far more stable confidence over the long run than worth measured primarily through comparison and external validation. Archangel Michael says, you are worth more than your most recent achievement or your most recent setback. That worth does not fluctuate the way your circumstances do, even though it can certainly feel that way during difficult stretches. Consider returning to this more stable foundation whenever external circumstances make your worth feel uncertain or conditional. Here is a 10th warning, concerning patience with your own healing process, whatever specific healing you are currently in the middle of. Notice if you have been comparing your pace to some external timeline, either one suggested by other people or one you have simply assumed without much reflection. Healing rarely follows a fixed, predictable schedule, and comparing your own pace to an artificial standard tends to produce unnecessary frustration and self-criticism. Consider releasing any specific timeline you have imposed on your own healing, replacing it with simple patience for whatever pace your particular process actually requires. This release does not mean abandoning effort or accountability. It simply means removing an artificial pressure that has likely been making an already difficult process even harder than it needs to be. Archangel Michael says, here is an 11th warning, one that concerns how much of your attention has been consumed by worry about things genuinely outside your control. Consider what percentage of your recent worry has been directed toward situations you can actually influence, compared to situations you can only observe and hope for, without any real power to change their outcome directly. Think about a specific worry that has been occupying significant mental energy recently, and honestly assess whether it falls into the category of things you can actually act on, or the category of things you can only release and trust to unfold as they will. If it falls into the second category, consider what it would mean to actually practice releasing it, deliberately, rather than continuing to hold on to worry that produces no actual benefit beyond additional stress. Archangel Michael says, releasing worry over things outside your control is not the same as not caring about the outcome. It simply means directing your limited energy toward what you can actually influence, rather than depleting yourself over matters that remain entirely beyond your control regardless of how much worry you invest in them. Here is a 12th warning, concerning generosity toward yourself specifically in moments of genuine limitation. Notice if you have been pushing yourself to meet standards that would be unreasonable to expect from anyone facing your exact current circumstances, essentially demanding more of yourself than you would ever demand of someone else in a similar situation. Consider what reasonable expectations would actually look like for you right now, given your current circumstances honestly assessed, rather than an idealized version of what you believe you should be capable of regardless of context. This adjustment is not lowering your standards permanently. It is simply calibrating them honestly to your actual current situation, rather than an unrealistic standard disconnected from the genuine limitations you are currently navigating. Archangel Michael says, you are allowed to be exactly as capable as your current circumstances genuinely allow, without additional guilt for not exceeding those reasonable limitations. This permission matters more than it might initially seem, especially for people who have spent considerable time holding themselves to standards that never accounted for genuine, legitimate limitation. If this message reached you today, trust that each of these specific warnings arrived precisely when you needed to hear them. Comment below which warning resonated most strongly with your own current situation. Share this message with someone who may need one or more of these specific reminders before continuing forward with decisions currently in front of them. Thank you for staying with this message until this point. There is a final set of warnings before this message closes completely, and they concern the future rather than the present, preparing you for what lies ahead rather than only addressing what is currently unfolding. Archangel Michael says, here is a warning about success, specifically about how you will handle it once it arrives, because it is arriving, sooner than the current difficulty may suggest. Consider what patterns might resurface once pressure eases and things begin going well. Some people, once relief finally arrives after a difficult stretch, quietly abandon the practices and boundaries that helped them survive the difficulty in the first place, assuming those practices are no longer necessary once circumstances improve. Consider what specific practice, built during difficulty, you want to consciously maintain even once things become easier, rather than assuming it was only necessary during hardship and can be safely abandoned afterward. The habits and boundaries that help you thrive during difficulty often continue to serve you well during easier seasons too, if you remain deliberate about maintaining them rather than letting them fade simply because the original urgency has passed. Archangel Michael says, here is a warning about comparison, one that will likely resurface once you begin experiencing genuine progress. As things improve, you may find yourself comparing your specific pace or specific outcomes to other people who appear to be progressing faster or achieving more. This comparison, even during improvement, can quietly undermine the genuine satisfaction you would otherwise experience from your own real progress. Consider committing, in advance, to measuring your progress against your own starting point rather than against other people's current position. This commitment, made now before comparison has a chance to take hold during a future season of visible progress, will serve you considerably better than trying to correct the pattern after it has already begun eroding your satisfaction with genuine, hard-won improvement. Archangel Michael says, here is a warning about relationships, specifically about who you allow closest to you as your circumstances continue to improve. Success and improved circumstances sometimes attract people whose interest is more connected to what you now have or what you can offer them, rather than genuine care for who you actually are as a person. Watch for this pattern as your circumstances continue shifting in a positive direction. Consider what specific criteria you will use to evaluate new relationships going forward, distinguishing genuine connection from interest that is primarily transactional or opportunistic. This discernment matters more during periods of visible improvement than during periods of difficulty, when opportunistic interest is naturally less common simply because there is less to be gained from associating with you. Archangel Michael says, "Here is a warning about complacency, one that often follows sustained improvement once initial urgency and motivation have faded into comfortable routine." Consider what specific practices helped you reach this improved position, and consider building in regular reflection to ensure those practices continue rather than gradually eroding once the original difficulty that motivated them has fully receded from memory. Consider scheduling regular check-ins with yourself, perhaps monthly or quarterly, specifically to evaluate whether the practices and boundaries that helped you improve your circumstances are still being actively maintained, or whether they have quietly begun eroding now that the original urgency has faded. This regular reflection, built into your routine deliberately, helps prevent the kind of gradual complacency that often undoes hard-won progress over time. Archangel Michael says, "Here is a final warning, perhaps the most important of the entire message. Do not let fear of these potential future pitfalls prevent you from actually pursuing and enjoying the improvement that is genuinely coming. These warnings are meant to prepare you, not to make you anxious about success before it has even arrived. Hold them lightly, as useful awareness rather than as a source of additional worry layered on top of everything else you have already been carrying." Consider what it would mean to move forward with both genuine excitement about what's coming and reasonable awareness of the pitfalls to watch for, holding both simultaneously without letting the second cancel out the first. This balance, difficult as it can be to maintain, tends to produce the most sustainable, genuinely satisfying version of long-term success and growth. Archangel Michael says, "You are equipped for both the difficulty currently in front of you and the improvement that is genuinely coming afterward. Trust that equipment, built through everything you have already survived and everything this message has named clearly today." If this message reached you today, believe that every warning shared here arrived precisely when you needed to hear it, preparing you both for present decisions and future circumstances. Comment below which warning felt most relevant to your current situation, or which one you want to specifically watch for as your circumstances continue to improve. Share this message with someone who could benefit from this same combination of present awareness and future preparation. Thank you for staying with this message until its very last word. Stay alert. Stay grounded. And trust that you are being prepared, carefully and deliberately, for everything still ahead. Before this message truly ends, there is one more practical layer worth adding, a way of actually applying everything shared so far rather than simply reading through it once and moving on unchanged. Archangel Michael says, "Consider choosing just one warning from everything shared today, the one that felt most immediately relevant to your current situation, and commit to actually addressing it this week, concretely, rather than trying to apply all 12 warnings simultaneously and likely accomplishing none of them well." Real change tends to happen through focused, sustained attention on one thing at a time, rather than scattered attempts to fix everything at once. Think about which specific warning stood out most clearly as you read through this message. Not the one that seems most impressive or most spiritually significant, simply the one that felt most immediately true about your actual current circumstances. Choose that one, and consider what a concrete first step toward addressing it would look like, specific enough that you could actually begin today. Archangel Michael says, write that specific warning down, along with your chosen first step, somewhere you will actually see it again tomorrow. Consider setting a reminder for 1 week from today, specifically to check whether you have actually taken that first step, or whether it has quietly slipped away amid the ordinary business of daily life the way most good intentions eventually do without deliberate follow-up. Consider who might hold you accountable to this specific commitment, someone you trust enough to share both the warning that resonated and the step you're planning to take in response to it. Accountability, chosen deliberately, significantly increases the likelihood that today's insight actually translates into real, lasting change rather than remaining simply an interesting idea you read about once. Archangel Michael says, real transformation happens through this kind of specific, sustained follow-through, far more reliably than through simply consuming more spiritual content or more warnings without ever actually implementing what any of it suggests. Consider today as the beginning of actual change, rather than simply another message read and then set aside without concrete follow-up. Think about what your life might look like in 3 months if you genuinely addressed the specific warning that resonated most today, applied consistently rather than only considered briefly and then forgotten. That future version of your life is available to you, built specifically through the follow-through this message is asking you to actually commit to today. Archangel Michael says, you are capable of this follow-through. Everything you have already survived is evidence of a persistence and capability more substantial than any temporary lapse in follow-through might suggest. Trust that capability, and apply it now, specifically, to the one warning that felt most true as you read through everything shared in this message. If this message reached you today, believe it arrived carrying everything you genuinely needed, both the awareness these warnings provide and the practical structure for actually implementing meaningful change based on them. Comment below which single warning you are choosing to focus on this week. Share this message with someone who might benefit from both the warnings themselves and this practical approach to actually applying them. Thank you, sincerely, for staying with this message until this final section. Stay alert. Stay grounded. Choose one thing. And begin today. Before you close this message, take one final moment to reflect on everything shared here today, not to feel overwhelmed by the number of warnings, but to notice how many of them were already, in some quiet way, things you already suspected about your own life before reading them today. Archangel Michael says, that recognition matters. These warnings were never meant to introduce entirely foreign concerns you had never previously considered. They were meant to name, clearly and directly, what a quieter part of you had already been sensing, giving you permission and clarity to finally act on intuitions you may have been dismissing or minimizing until now. Consider what it means that so much of this message felt familiar rather than surprising, confirmation rather than revelation. Trust your own intuition more going forward, understanding that it has likely been more accurate and more perceptive than you have generally given it credit for. Archangel Michael says, here is a final reflection before this message closes completely. Warnings, taken seriously and acted upon, are ultimately acts of self-respect, not sources of anxiety or fear. Choosing to protect your time, your energy, your boundaries, and your well-being is not paranoia. It is simply wise stewardship of a life that matters, deserving of the same careful attention you would naturally extend toward protecting anything else genuinely valuable to you. Consider adopting this framing going forward, understanding vigilance and self-protection not as fearful, anxious behaviors, but as calm, deliberate acts of genuine self-respect, chosen consistently rather than only during moments of acute crisis or difficulty. Archangel Michael says, you deserve that self-respect, applied consistently, not only during moments when circumstances force you to finally pay attention. Consider what it would mean to extend this same quality of attention and protection to yourself proactively, rather than only reactively once difficulty has already made it unavoidable. If this message reached you today, trust that everything shared here, all 12 warnings and everything discussed alongside them, arrived exactly when you were ready to hear and genuinely apply them. Thank you for staying with this message until its true final word, and for taking seriously something that was written specifically to protect and prepare you. Stay alert. Stay grounded. Protect what matters. And walk forward, equipped and ready for everything ahead. Archangel Michael says, one last thought before you go. Consider what it would look like to revisit this message periodically, not just today, but perhaps once a month for the next several months, checking in with yourself about whether these 12 warnings still apply, whether new ones have emerged, whether the specific one you chose to focus on today has genuinely become a sustained practice rather than a brief, temporary adjustment. Consider setting a recurring reminder for this kind of periodic check-in, treating your own well-being and discernment as something that deserves ongoing, deliberate attention rather than a single moment of insight that fades naturally once daily life resumes its ordinary pace and demands. Archangel Michael says, growth of this kind rarely happens through a single dramatic moment of realization. It happens through this kind of sustained, periodic attention, returning again and again to check whether you are actually living according to what you have already come to understand, rather than simply understanding it once and assuming that understanding alone is sufficient for lasting change. Think about what would genuinely help you sustain this kind of ongoing attention, given your specific personality and circumstances. Some people benefit from written journaling. Others benefit from regular conversation with a trusted friend or counselor. Others benefit from simple, quiet reflection built into an existing routine, like a regular walk or a consistent morning practice. Consider which approach fits you best, and consider committing to it starting this week. Archangel Michael says, you have everything you need to sustain this kind of ongoing growth, built through everything you have already survived and everything this message has offered you today. Trust that capability, and apply it consistently, not only today but in the weeks and months that follow. If this message reached you today, believe that it offered you both immediate insight and a sustainable path toward continuing to apply that insight well beyond today alone. Thank you, genuinely, for staying with this message until its very last word. Stay alert. Stay grounded. Keep returning to what matters. And walk forward, protected and prepared, into everything still ahead of you. Consider, before you fully close this message, taking one slow, deliberate breath, letting it mark the transition between everything you have just read and the rest of your day now waiting for you. Let that breath carry with it a quiet commitment to actually apply at least one thing from everything shared here today, rather than simply moving on unchanged. Archangel Michael says, that single breath, and the commitment it carries, matters more than any individual sentence written in this entire message. Words alone rarely change a life. Deliberate, consistent action, chosen and repeated over time, is what actually does. God says, this message is now complete. Everything you needed has been offered, both the warnings themselves and the practical structure for actually living differently because of them. Carry it forward, gently but seriously, and trust that the effort you invest in applying it will be worth everything it asks of you. If this message reached you today, it reached you because you were ready to receive both its warnings and its encouragement. Walk forward now, protected, aware, and equipped for whatever comes next. Archangel Michael says, "Thank you for staying until the very last word today." That patience itself says something about how seriously you are taking your own growth, and that seriousness will serve you well in everything still ahead. Consider what you will tell yourself tomorrow morning, the first thought you choose to carry into the new day, whether it reflects today's warnings taken seriously or lets them quietly fade the way most passing insights eventually do without deliberate follow-through. Choose deliberately. That first thought sets the tone for how consistently you actually apply everything shared here today. God says, "Go now, alert and equipped, carrying every warning shared today as a tool for genuine protection rather than a source of fear." That is the whole purpose of everything written here. Archangel Michael says, that is everything for today. Stay alert, stay grounded, and walk forward knowing you are genuinely protected. Consider sharing this message with one more person before you go, someone specific who came to mind while reading through these warnings, someone who might need exactly this reminder today. That act of sharing extends the protection offered here beyond just yourself, into the life of someone else who may be standing at their own quiet crossroads right now. God says, this message is now truly complete. You are protected, you are equipped, and you are ready for whatever comes next. Archangel Michael says, walk gently, walk wisely, and walk forward, carrying everything you needed from today into all the days still ahead of you. Consider what you now understand differently, having read all 12 warnings carefully, compared to how you understood your own situation before opening this message today. That shift in understanding, however subtle, is real, and it belongs to you now, ready to be applied the moment you need it most. Archangel Michael says, carry these warnings not as a burden but as a gift, freely given, meant to protect rather than to frighten. That distinction matters more than anything else discussed here today. God says, go now, carrying this protection with you into every decision, every relationship, and every quiet moment still ahead of you today. Archangel Michael says, one final breath before you close this message completely. Let it settle everything you have just read, and let it mark the beginning of how you choose to live differently, starting today, having received exactly what you needed exactly when you needed it. God says, this is truly the final word for today. You are seen, you are protected, and you are ready. Archangel Michael says, thank you again for staying with this message until its true and final end. Few take the time these days. That patience is itself evidence of how seriously you are taking your own growth, and it will not go unrewarded. Consider closing your eyes for just a moment before you go, letting everything shared here settle fully, before stepping back into the rest of your day carrying it forward with you.